everyone, and welcome. Rochester Community Schools is so proud and honored to present this panel discussion on building an inclusive library K through 5. So today we will be discussing the importance of immersing children in inclusive text, why inclusive texts are so critical, how to select inclusive books, and how to have more engaging conversations about these texts and more. So although the conversation is geared toward elementary age students, much of our discussion tonight can be helpful for adults interacting with small children, pre-K, younger, or grade 6 and beyond. So you might find this useful for so many different age groups. And also thank you for submitting your ideas and thoughts and suggestions prior to tonight's discussion, as these will help guide our discussion tonight and our conversation in a direction that will help answer your questions and meet your needs. So even in these uncertain times, we understand the importance of immersing youth in inclusive text. So we will make sure to cover how to do that in a physical version and also in an online format. So we hope that after this conversation, you will walk away with knowledge, tips, resources, and anything you need necessary to enrich the lives of our youth in the area of literacy. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you some of my friends here. So first is Rochelle Barclay. She's a literacy coach for Warren Woods Public Schools and reading recovery teacher leader in Warren Woods Macomb area site. So hi, Rochelle.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be on this panel and to discuss this important work. I believe that representation in children's books is especially important. It has always been, but in these times it is especially important, and especially for early elementary, which is where my expertise is. It's really good. Kids are eager to learn. They're eager to see themselves in stories. They're eager to see their stories and their own stories and stories that they read and hear and read alouds and have in their classroom libraries. So I think this is important work, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Colleen Mesta. She's the president of the Oakland County Reading Council, information literacy specialist at Brooklands Elementary School in Rochester, and she's also a national board certified teacher in the area of K-8 literacy. So welcome, Colleen.
Thanks, Tiffany. So I'm honored to be here, and thank you for everybody that's taking time out of your busy day to tune into this really important conversation and this important work that I know we're all super passionate about. Personally, I was a classroom teacher and then I'm now obviously in the library, and I'm a mom of a 4- and 6-year-old. So I really think that it's my goal to raise empathetic and understanding and compassionate citizens of the world. And I think we can do that through stories. I think that when we really ensure that our kids are reading and being exposed to inclusive text, that's when we really foster that empathy. So it's something that I'll continue to work on, and I'm excited to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Colleen. Next is Jennifer Robinson. She's a 5th grade teacher at Long Meadow Elementary School in Rochester. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. I also am very excited to be participating tonight. As a woman of color, as a mother, and as a teacher, this area is so important to me. I feel that every single child should feel that they have a space and that they are welcome in their classroom. And hopefully these lessons that we learn in the classroom about inclusivity and representation, they can take home, and this will foster conversations at home as well. So I'm excited to be a part of this work and bringing this awareness to our community.
Thank you, Jennifer. And next we have Lynn Newmeyer. She's a reading recovery teacher leader and district early literacy coach for Rochester Community Schools. So welcome, Lynn.
Hi, I am so thrilled to be here. When Tiffany asked me, I got so excited because there's nothing I like more than talking to people who enjoy doing read alouds with their students and expanding that knowledge. I'm a parent. Between my husband and I, we have 4 children, and are you ready for this? 11 grandchildren. And they range in age from just starting kindergarten to graduating college. And all of them know if they're getting a present from me, it's going to be a book. I've been an educator for more than 4 decades. I've been a classroom teacher, special education teacher. I've done elementary and middle school. I'm passionate about collecting children's books. I've had to pay overweight fees when I've flown on airplanes on trips. I'm also passionate about ensuring that all students receive an exemplary literacy instruction. Along with being an avid reader, it's more than just that, because my favorite thing is to be able to talk to other people about books. I just wanted to talk for a minute about why I think I have that passion, because I think it comes from my childhood. I am a child of the 60s. Yes, that makes me old. But that was a time of great civil unrest and huge cultural paradigm shift. And it all played out on our family TV starting from 2nd and 3rd grade to when I graduated from high school. So every night at dinner, we had very lively conversations because my dad in his career was originally a history teacher. And I think because of that, that is why I have this love for talking about books. I look forward to later on tonight sharing with you more about how my identity informed me of my choices of career and the passion I have for teaching students how to learn to talk about books in order to make those deep comprehensions that increase their understanding. I want to see children get lost in a book. That makes us all better people.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Next, we have Sarah Kirby. She's a 1st grade teacher at Hamlin Elementary School in Rochester. So welcome, Sarah.
Hi everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight talking about books. A little bit about myself. I'm a mom. I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, both boys. I've been a teacher in Rochester for 14 years now. I have taught 2nd grade, I jumped up to 4th grade, and then I moved back down, and I currently teach 1st grade, which is where my heart is. I love the littles. When I think about developing an inclusive library, I love using these books to teach caring and empathy. We have a lot of teachable moments in 1st grade, especially when it comes to how to do school, how to listen to the tall lady. So I really enjoy sharing these books. It's a passion of mine to collect them. And I'm excited to share that with all of you tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. We have Katie Allen. She's a principal at Hamlin Elementary Schools. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks, Tiffany. Thank you so much for including me in this important discussion. I'm so pleased and honored to be here with all of you tonight. I've always been an avid reader. I've loved reading and learning about other people's perspectives and situations, or spending time walking in other people's shoes to hear and understand their story, and also having the opportunity to have your imagination sparked and get to explore new worlds. I have been a librarian, and as a former librarian, I really come to this discussion pretty naturally, I believe, as I've always championed and promoted literacy. I do believe that hearing different stories provide us with the opportunity to learn something new and realize our similarities, and then also develop empathy for others. For me, I really believe that the empathy work is imperative. Having empathy in this world really is a cornerstone to a healthy community, and it enables us to develop compassion, to be able to relate to others, and to see things from a different perspective. And I think that's really important. And as a building leader, I really believe I communicate not only through my words, but also my actions. And one of those big things is the importance and benefits of literacy. So promoting inclusive libraries is a priority, as I'm committed to cultivate that positive school culture where all my students and all my staff and all my families feel valued and included. It is absolutely vital to cultivate that sense of belonging. That's very important. By being intentional in developing an inclusive library, it sends the message that, hey, we see you, we value you, and you belong. And I just love the fact that books are a perfect way to send that message. So it's been fun for me to continue that work of filling bookshelves. I keep books in my office, and it's just really nice to continue to see good titles that I can share with kids who come in and they can borrow and I can read as well. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Katie. And tonight I'll be moderating the conversation. I am Tiffany Galladay. I'm the interim learning consultant of instructional equity, inclusion, and belonging here in Rochester. And I'm also a reading recovery interventionist. So I am so excited and so passionate about literacy and also allowing our students to be able to see themselves and also to see others who are not like them. So I am so excited to have all of my friends here to talk about this topic. So we're going to start with just some questions that the panel wanted us to go over. So I have the questions right here and I'm going to pull them out. Our first question that we have that you were interested in us talking about is, why are inclusive books so important? And this question is geared toward Colleen and Rochelle, but anybody else feel free to jump in.
All right, so in a short amount of time, we'll try to answer this huge question. I think it's really important to think about the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. And if you saw Tiffany's flyer, she had that quote right in the corner, and it's so poignant. And she wrote a piece in the 90s where she coined that phrase. And so if you're not familiar, it talks about the importance of having books that are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And what that means is a mirror book is a book where we see ourselves, and a window is where we're really able to look into another world, another life experience, and a sliding door is really stepping into that world, which we all know books allow us to do. She goes on to state a little bit further that it's not just children who have been underrepresented in books that need books where they can actually see themselves, but it's also kids who always find the mirrors. And at times, they sometimes get this exaggerated sense of perhaps their own self-worth and a false sense of what the world is like. So it's really, really vital that we're ensuring that we are presenting books to all students to value all voices. And you'll notice tonight that we're using the word inclusive rather than diverse. And just to give you a little bit of background on why we feel that's so important, an educator, Chad Everett, put this the best way. So I'm going to steal his words. He talked about that when we use the word diverse, if we're saying diverse books or, give me a list of diverse books, we're really creating this binary, and it creates this default, right? Like diverse from who, diverse from what. And currently, as that word is used, it often centers this heteronormative whiteness as the default. And we don't want that to be this binary position. And so when we think about inclusive, it's really it's all voices. So we're not just talking about race, we're talking about culture and background and everything that goes into that. So the last thing that I want to kind of share with you is Chad talks about this continuum that we as readers read across. And I love thinking about this, especially as an educator and as a parent, because a book is not in and of itself a mirror just for everybody, right? So you're either on this side of the continuum where you're picking up that book, and maybe the book is affirming your life experience, or you're reading a book and it's affirming the life experience of somebody else, somebody very different from you. And so depending on who you are and depending on your life experiences, and it will change throughout your life, you're going to have this different experience with a book. And so, as teachers and parents and educators, I think it's our job to make sure that everybody that is in our care can find a book for both experiences, right? And so we have to kind of evaluate our home library and our classroom and think, okay, what books are really kind of just my mirror and what am I missing? So inclusive just is this word that I think we want to continue to use. So I hope that's clear, but chime in, guys, if I missed it.
And so one of the other things that I wanted to share, Tiffany, there is just a quick infographic that kind of sums up or goes along with what you were saying, Colleen, about how children see themselves in books. And we've been talking about how important it is that children are able to see themselves in books. And so I'm glad that you gave the importance of the distinction between diversity and inclusiveness. Although this does say diversity, I really want to draw your attention to just the graphic, what we see here. And as you can see, different groups, different ethnic groups, different children, the percentage to which they see themselves in books, that books represent or mirror their unique experiences. And as you can see, outside of the white group, animals are represented in stories more often than children get to see their authentic experiences. And the other thing that, to draw your attention to is, even as you look at the mirrors, as you look at the representation of the way the kids are represented in the books, the mirrors get smaller, they're damaged, they're cracked. So even though there may be some characters in the books where children are meant to see themselves, it's not always an authentic experience. It's not always a positive experience. It's not always a positive representation. Therefore, the mirror has some damage to it and some cracks to it. So that's why I think it is really important that we think about this. Now, the good news in this is, when I've looked at the same infographic from 2015, the numbers were even lower. So it has gotten better. So hopefully going forward, we start to see better representation, a more equal disbursement of representation. But it's just important to think about the kinds of stories that are being told, the kinds of things that our kids are hearing. So I just like to look at this infographic. I think it just kind of sums things up nicely into, are we really being inclusive in the books that we select for our kids, whether it's our kids at home at night when we read bedtime stories, or whether it's during a read aloud in class, or whether it's books that are just available for kids to have for their own personal reading in the classroom. These things, this is just a good way, a good reminder of how important it is to have an inclusive library.
Thank you so much, Rochelle and Colleen. I think that was such a great explanation of inclusive books and why they're so important. We're going to move on to our next question that the viewers, all of you, submitted to us. And the question is, how do I know if the books I select are culturally appropriate and representative? So this one is for Sarah and myself. So Sarah and I will answer this question for you, and I'll pull back up our slide. All right.
All right, so Tiffany and I talked about this a lot, and we kind of came up with 3 areas that we think are important to consider when you're thinking about adding a book to your library at home or your library in your classroom. So we talked about, is it authentic? Is it culturally competent? And is it realistic? So when we're thinking about if a book is authentic, one of the first things that I do is I look at the author and the illustrator. I love going to their website. In 4th grade, we loved looking at Sharon Draper's website. In 2nd grade, we look at Tommy DePaula. And really thinking about the background of that author. Where did they grow up? Did they grow up speaking a different language? What background do they bring to this book? So that's the first thing I would do. Once you take a look inside the book, I would look for, how is this culture represented? If this book is showing one culture or one group, is the language represented? Is there an accent in the book? Does the dialogue show authentic language for this group of people? And then I think it's important to think about who is telling the story. Is the main character a member of a cultural group? Or does the narrator have a different perspective from those main characters? And again, I think it's really important to check out the author and the illustrator's website. It's one of my favorite things to do with my class, to see what awards they've won. Sometimes the kids even make a connection that they've read a different book by this author before, which is always lovely to see as a teacher. Sometimes there are little interviews with the author and the illustrator, but their websites, I think, are really great resources to take a look at when you're first looking at a book.
Thank you, Sarah. And then also the next question you can ask yourself when selecting a book and trying to figure out if it is appropriate or inclusive is it culturally competent? And you can look for tokenism. And when I think of tokenism, I think of that only one kind of message. Examples would be if there's only one child in the book with a disability, and then there are many others without. And so what happens is then children can then begin to form stereotypes based upon just one experience and not looking at a whole group. Something else to look for would be invisibility. So if you don't see any children ever in books with disabilities, then that would be problematic. Also, if you don't see families from rural communities or different family structures, like a single parent point of view. So looking for whether or not these different cultural identity groups are being represented at all. And then thinking about balance. So looking at the books in your classroom library, looking at the books in your home library, and thinking about, do I have too many of these and not enough of these? So thinking about having a good balance of all different kinds of books that represent all children from different backgrounds. And that does promote a sense of belonging for children who are in the classroom, especially if there's, hearing about a story that relates to them. And then thinking about, does this book portray negative stereotypes? Making sure that we're not having a book that, kids are reading it and then they base, one experience of one character in the book for the whole entire group, that whole ethnic group or that whole cultural group. And then thinking about the author's message. So what kind of message is being portrayed? What does that message tell our students about that group of people? So keeping in mind, and I have this here on the slide, keep in mind only teaching about a culture in terms of oppression. What does that teach our children? So if you're only reading books about the civil rights movement, or if you're only reading books about the Japanese internment camps, what does that teach our children? Can we read books where we are highlighting different cultures in a positive light that shows that it's more than just that about their culture? So include these books in your read alouds to show the joy and the wonder. There's so many wonderful things about so many different cultures, and keeping these as separate teaching points from some of the more oppressive cultural views.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Did you want to add something, Jennifer?
Well, I was just going to say, going back to the slide about cultural competence, that's such an important, especially in upper L and into middle school and high school, with books that you're reading, especially around historical fiction, making sure that the authenticity of the author, coming from that background, because sometimes there are stereotypes that, we have to deal with in some classic literature that, we now know is outdated and can be harmful. And, just really being mindful of not teaching lessons about inclusivity and, marginalized groups kind of on the backs of these groups. So that was just my only thing, was, that it's important, not just in the picture books, but also in the novels that you read as you get older as well.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Jennifer. This is why I think this discussion is so important as we're talking about elementary, but a lot of this can also be, used for other groups too, like high school, our high school students too, and middle school students. So thank you for that.
And then Tiffany and I talked about checking to see if a book is realistic. And one thing, Tiffany, that you brought up that I hadn't really thought about is the copyright date. Is this book recent? Does it portray, what's going on in society at the moment? Is the content accurate? And I think what Jennifer was mentioning about some of the historical fiction, are these realistic settings? Where does the story take place? Is it way out kind of in, a fantasy, or is this a setting that students can actually picture themselves in and identify with to be able to connect?
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of times when we're talking about this topic, we're also, we focus so much on fiction text, but I like what you're talking about as far as the content being accurate. This can also be applied to nonfiction text. So looking at that copyright date, thinking about the information being presented within the text, is that relevant information? Can our students connect with that information? What kind of biases are there within the text that we can pick out? And does the book include photographs and illustrations? And what are those photographs and illustrations? Are they stereotypical photographs and pictures that maybe will have biases within themselves, you know? So, and then lastly here we have, does the text allow for students to make connections to their own lives? And we talk about this again and again, and this is something Rochelle and also Colleen talked about too, is we have to make sure that we're thinking about the little faces looking in front of us, but then also thinking about those that are not, right? So making sure that we can connect our students who are sitting in front of us to books that represent them, but then also books that maybe don't represent them that they can learn from. And I want to talk, I just thought about something. I want to talk about the invisibility piece that I mentioned earlier. It's so easy to pick up a book and look at the illustration and go, oh, okay, this book, you know, it looks like there's an Asian, you know, girl on the cover. This must be inclusive. But if you think about it in this way, you can close your eyes. And if you can close your eyes and read that book or have it read to you and not even know that that character is Asian, then what does that tell you? What message does that send? So invisibility can also be the message. And just listening to that book, would you even know that that character is from a marginalized group or not? So that's also important, making sure not just the images in the book represent our children, but also the message and the language, what they're hearing also represents them as well. So Sarah and I found this awesome website here. It's called Join KidMap, and it's a great way for you to be able to determine whether or not the books that you have are appropriate, are inclusive, and if it's a great book for you to buy. So you can click that, you can go to that website, and it's very helpful. It's like a checklist to see, okay, well, maybe not, maybe I shouldn't buy this book, or yeah, I think this book has that. So this will also be on the resource page that we'll provide for you at the end of our conversation.
Hey, Tiff, can I just, go ahead, Colleen.
No, Katie, go ahead.
I was thinking about when you were talking about, you know, checking the copyright date and realizing, you know, that depending on when the books were written and the kinds of information, and even in part of our nonfiction text, and just, you know, putting it out to the panel, but also sharing my own opinion of, you know, that is a really great opportunity too for people to have conversations about different things. Like, yep, this book was written at the, like books that I read when I was a young girl, you know, we would find a lot of things to talk about and then be able to figure out what kind of the why behind all that and have those good conversations. So I was just thinking about that and making sure, reminding people that it's good to have conversations. And a lot of times those give you the perfect opportunity to have it.
Yeah, Katie, I totally agree with you. And it ties to what I wanted to bring up as well. Two things that parents and educators can search, kind of like a hashtag or just a search of own voices. So own voices really means that the author of the book is representing the group that they're writing about, which you sometimes would just assume that happens, and you would just be shocked at how often that actually is not the case. So to really, really understand that, you know, if the book is about a marginalized or underrepresented group of people, that author is also a member of that group as well, because that, like Tiffany was saying, will ensure that the perspective is accurate and portrayed in the way that group has lived that experience. And what Katie was saying, and this is something that we don't often talk about in elementary, this idea of disrupting the canon gets talked a lot about in high school, right? And this idea of the classics and what books, when you talk about copyright date, right? Like what books should we be reading? But in an elementary world, we have to really do some deep digging and thinking that our favorites that we had as kids, you know, I loved listening to The Indian in the Cupboard. I can remember the nostalgia of my teacher when I was in 3rd grade reading this to me. But there are some really problematic things in that book, and I would not necessarily share that with students today. There would be other choices that I could share that would represent that group of people in a much more authentic way. And so I think that it's tricky. And I think internally as parents, we sometimes struggle with this. Oh, I loved this book and my parents read it to me. But we don't have to bury the nostalgia, right? Like we can have the memory and the nostalgia of that experience of reading the book, and we don't have to have that taken away from us, but we do have to kind of be responsible professionally on what books we continue to bring in, and even in our homes as well. And so that can be tricky, and we kind of have to separate the two. It's okay to have that memory of that experience, but we kind of have to prepare that next generation of readers and make sure that we're preparing them with, like you both said, that authenticity. So it's tricky.
I completely agree with you, Colleen. I think that's an excellent point. And I think also as a teacher, coming from this from a teacher's lens, I also think when you are bringing in books that, you know, yes, they might disrupt the canon, or they might be books that are a good talking point because you can have a discussion around an outdated viewpoint. I do think as a teacher, it is very important to be aware, though, of your classroom and your audience, because if you have students that are part of this marginalized group that are in your classroom, that can be a very uncomfortable experience for them. And again, it goes back to that, you know, not building teaching points on the backs of people that are already coming from a marginalized group. So it helps certainly when you have a book from, you know, an author that can represent that authentic voice. But if it's not, then, you know, it kind of is our professional responsibility also to find text that can kind of have that same conversation and that same challenging of this, you know, conventional mentality without making it kind of an undue burden on those children in our classroom that are part of these groups that are already facing marginalization.
Jennifer, that was one of the things I was going to say. Sometimes it's really hard. I know when I used to teach, you want to have these conversations and you want to do it in a really productive and you know, valuing way. But I think a lot of times, I know I felt like nervous, like things will come up and, you know, you just really worry. And so I appreciate what you said, Jennifer, because you do have to make sure that you're not making it worse for other people in your classroom. But you also, I guess that's why you should be participating in things like this, so that you get an opportunity to kind of think about everything that you need to be thinking about when you are talking about, because it is important to have the conversations.
And to add to that too, so many of our students will be listening to books online. And so if you think about the voices being used to read some of those books, and I know Sarah, you and I talked a little bit about language and how certain jargons are spoken in books. And so when you hear someone who may not be a cultural insider read those books, that could be deemed offensive as well. So not just the book itself, but sometimes even who's reading the book if you're listening to it auditorily. So, okay, well, we have another question here. Okay. The next question is, how can I incorporate inclusive text in my neighborhood and community? And this one is for Sarah.
I think we have a slide on this one, Tiffany, don't we? Okay.
Yes, we do.
This is something that I really thought a lot about in these several months that we've been home with libraries closed for a while. So one thing that I tried just in my neighborhood was we did a little neighborhood book swap, and I thought this is a great idea to spread my inclusive library all through my neighborhood. And it really, it was great. I had a waiting list for Mommy's Kimar. It was just a wonderful way and for kids to really get to read books that maybe they hadn't experienced before. So we've done that 2 times now, and it's just been wonderful. Another great way to share books in your community, and this might be for the teachers as well. I had an Amazon wish list that I shared with families at curriculum night, and I had such a generous group of families this past year. They bought every single book on my wish list, and some of them even I had 2 copies of, which was great, so I could send them home with kids. But for parents to donate a book to their child's teacher, it's so appreciated. Maybe it's a book that showcases your culture, or a book that's really near and dear to your heart and, you know, something that your family likes to read. Donate it to your child's teacher. They would love it. Another wonderful experience that I've had a lot at Hamlin is parents coming in to read a book that showcases their culture. The kids love it. Sometimes they'll share a little bit of their native language. And I'm just thinking, now that we're remote, this is something that you could do with your neighbors as well. Maybe calling them up to do a little bedtime story FaceTime would be a wonderful way to share some of your books. And then I know, Lynn, we were talking about this earlier, but books make a great gift for birthdays and holidays. I feel like there's this rhyme. It's something they can wear, something they need, something they want, something they can read. So just something to keep in mind when you're giving gifts. I know my parents give my kids a book pretty often, and they'll write a little note in it so they can think of them whenever they read the book. And then I know all around Rochester, we have some of those cute little free libraries. I know at Hamlin, we have one on the playground. So if there's a book that you really love, think about buying a copy to donate to your little library to share in your community. So just a couple of ideas.
And I think about how powerful that is to have a parent come in and share a book with their authentic experience. It gives the kid a sense of pride. You know, they're hearing this great story. Their mom or dad or grandma's there reading that story. And it just really is a wonderful experience. It creates your classroom community. It brings your kids closer together as a community. And I think even with many of us going virtual online learning for an unspecified amount of time, this is a wonderful opportunity to do that. This is a great time. This is the silver lining and what's going on with everything. So we have great opportunities to do that, great opportunities to reach out to relatives in other parts of the country, other parts of the world even, to share those experiences with our kids. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts you can give to the kids in your classroom.
Thank you, Rochelle. I just wanted to add also that I really like how we're not thinking it's just around the holidays. Like, it's holidays, so now we're going to talk about Hanukkah, we're going to do Christmas, we're going to do Kwanzaa. That we're trying to make this part of our everyday life and culture so that all of our students feel welcome, and that the kids can see themselves all year long. It's not just February's Black History Month. I mean, that comes up so often and it feels like artificial. It doesn't feel real. It feels like check off the box. So I'm just going to tell you, the book I'm sharing with you tonight is actually going to my granddaughter's birthday on Saturday. So it's not a special time, except for it's a special book.
Well, and I think too, you know, and as Lynn reads this book, this is a good little leeway in, but when we share our stories, and we know this as classroom teachers, that's how we build that sense of community and that sense of understanding and belonging, right? And so even if we are in a remote world and we're sharing our stories online, if we're sharing these inclusive books, we're sharing stories of the world, right? Of these citizens who live everywhere and live in our community and in our neighborhood. And so, you know, as cheesy as it sounds, that stories really do connect us. They truly do. And I have seen it time and time again in the library and in the classroom, where the conversations we've had surrounding books have brought me to tears, have just touched me in ways that I never thought would be possible. So book, I mean, it is like the magic key, I think, just to everything. And I just think that we sometimes make it too difficult when we just need to open these books and share them, and they really do connect us.
Thank you for that, Colleen. And that made me think about something too. You talked about how stories are so important and how they connect us. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it's so important for that own voices. You know, whenever I tell a story, I want to tell my story, right? And like, even if it's just something that happened to me that day, it's not the same than if somebody else tells it, because they haven't lived it. So thank you for that. Our next question here is, where can I find inclusive books? We have a bunch of us on here to answer this one, so anybody can go ahead and chime in.
I had, Tiffany, there's a slide that just has a few great titles that just in different things I've been working on this summer, different conversations that I've been having with other teachers, just a quick snippet of some great inclusive books. And I have a little disclaimer, this is in no way a complete list. This is just some good for early elementary books if you're thinking about some inclusive books. This is also included in the resources, although the titles are included, with some links to some YouTube read alouds. If you just kind of want to preview the book before you make the investment for it, or if you want to create that wish list for your class. But the good news is, I mean, these books can be found lots of places. So now that Tiffany and Sarah have talked about how to determine if a book really is culturally appropriate and representative, now you can kind of start to do that work to curate those books for your classroom libraries, for your kids' libraries at home. Part of my work as a reading recovery teacher leader is reading recovery is an intervention program for first grade learners. And so part of my role as a teacher leader is that I purchase books from publishers for our teachers to use. The thing about our reading recovery books is they are vetted by our reading recovery community. So we use the books that are on our list, but there are literally thousands of books on that list. And some publishers are really committed to telling authentic stories. And some that I like to use for teachers that are looking for specific publishers, Lee and Low Publishers, they have some great books with great representation. Also, Townsend Press. Townsend Press has good books, particularly the King School series. They have that follow just children in their everyday lives, doing their everyday things. And what first grader doesn't want to read about a kid doing the things that they do? They have a lost tooth, or they get to visit grandma's house, or their pet hamster gets lost. So, but it's just really authentic, and many of them are own voices. So again, just like what Tiffany and Sarah shared with us, do your research and vetting out your books. But I found lots of my books at just the typical places, libraries, Barnes and Noble, just different places. Some of your great small business or owned bookstores in your communities and in your towns. So lots of places to locate all kinds of great books.
And I would add on too that your school, our actual titles, information literacy specialist, so it's quite long, but your school librarian, reach out to them. And even in this remote world, you know, we are experts on children's literature, and we have poured ourselves into this work. And so reach out to them and ask for recommendations, and they'll be able to lead you in the right way. And the Rochester Hills Public Library is amazing. The children's department is phenomenal. And if you reach out to them, they will definitely point you in the right direction. And so definitely use those resources that you have. And, you know, for parents that aren't aware, just by having a student in Rochester schools, they automatically have a public library card. So you don't have to fill out any paperwork. You don't have to do anything. You just show up and say, hey, my kid goes to school here, and you are in. And again, their children's librarian, and their staff is amazing. And I think, and we've talked a lot about this, but just to help kind of get a grasp, especially for teachers, when you're looking at your classroom library or even in your home library, is we use this term of kind of weeding it out and pulling out things that are just, you know, old or outdated, or maybe have some misrepresentation in it. And then really looking at it and saying, okay, where are my gaps? Who am I missing? I have a lot of representation for this group, but I don't have anything for this. And then that's where you can start searching. And, you know, online, you can Google just about anything and find a great list. But it's hard to say, here is an inclusive list, right? Because all readers are so different. So you really have to know your child and know your classroom and your kiddos to be able to kind of match those texts with them. But I mean, just within our own school district, we have so many experts of children's literature that we are eager to talk about books.
And for those people who are, you know, on social media, I know I follow on Instagram. There are some amazing educators and kind of leaders at the forefront of bringing inclusivity to literature. One of them is the book Wrangler, Diverse Reads, the Apron Educator, Tutu Teacher. These are all people I follow on Instagram that are constantly putting out lists of, books that are, again, written by authentic voices and are, representative of a wide swath of our community and our society. And they're excellent. So if you are on Instagram, follow some of those people because they're constantly giving great recommendations.
Can I second the Tutu Teacher, because I've learned so much from her. Like, if you're watching this, write that down. She not only suggests books, but she'll give you some talking points. She'll kind of walk you through a couple of pages. I've learned so much just from looking at her Instagram page and her website. I think she even has a list where you can look by group. So when Colleen was talking about kind of taking the temperature of your home library and your school library, you can look and see which titles would go, with that culture, with that group of people. But social media is a great way to find out about new books that have just been published. Highly recommend.
I have to give 2 shout outs too, if we're going to give like great recs for teachers. Donalyn Miller, if you don't know her, she's like, love her. Yeah, her work is amazing. If you're a teacher and you don't know her, just look her up and buy everything she's written. But she started giving away a book a day starting in 2016, a book a day that she mails out to teachers. And it is always an inclusive book. It's always just an amazing book. So even if you don't win, which I have not been fortunate to win yet, but I have an ongoing list. And so that for me is a resource, because if Donalyn says it's great, it's amazing. And John Shu, Mr. Shu Reads, he has an amazing blog and I love him dearly. And he's also an amazing resource for educators and parents too. His blog is great and he often gets to highlight releasing covers and talking about books and interviewing the author, which is fabulous to use in your classroom as well. So if you start to follow those people, especially on Twitter, and then you look to see who they're following, and your world is just exploding and you'll have lots of resources. So it's great.
Can I add on? I can't forget the Nerdy Book Club, because every morning I get their recommendations with authors, publishers, teachers that are using books in a variety of ways. We did have Nerd Camp for a number of years. We probably wouldn't have had it this year, but if you've been a Nerd Camp person before, it's an opportunity to actually, we got to meet Jason Reynolds. I thought my whole life was made at that point. Kate DiCamillo, I mean, you name the authors, they're all there, and hearing their stories on why they wrote the stories is just fills your heart up. And then you've got that heart work going on, which engages you wanting to know more about the stories and share that with your students.
Well, and I think kids forget that authors are real people and they're alive. And, when you start to really dig in and get to know, like you said, Lynn, their stories, it's amazing. And you talk about connecting, right? Yeah, there's amazing new authors and illustrators and creators out there who we need to share their work and share their stories.
For sure. And there are a couple of bookstores. I'm all about supporting small businesses, especially right now. So of course, Amazon is a great place to go, but there's also the I See Me bookstore, EYE, I See Me. There's the Book Beat, which I grew up in Oak Park. So that's always been my #1 spot to buy books. There's a John K. King store. You can buy books there. There's Blackstone Bookstore, which I think is like in the Grand Rapids area. And then, like we said, there's the Rochester Hills Public Library. And then there's Detroit Book City, which is another great one. So don't worry, you don't have to write all these things down. At the end of all of this, we will have a resource link that you can click on with all of the information that we have. So don't worry a single bit. Okay. Our next question from you is, how can schools, teachers, and parents fund an inclusive library? And this one was for Jennifer, Colleen, and Katie.
Well, I know when we were talking about this, a little bit before, as a teacher, obviously, we pour so much of our heart and soul and our money into our classrooms. So, that was kind of the first thing on my mind was, well, where will we get these books? And, there's two things. Number one, we all have PTAs that are incredibly supportive and, want to do what's best for our classrooms. So, reaching out to them is a great way to possibly fund some of these books in the classroom. And then also, I think, Sarah, you had mentioned this in another earlier, but, giving books to the classroom. We can't, we don't send in birthday treats anymore, cupcakes and everything like that, which is fantastic because I'd not need to eat another cupcake. But, if you still want to have a way to celebrate a birthday or some kind of great occasion, donating a book and, following these people on Instagram or Twitter or, some of these resources that are going to be available. If you find a book that, again, is inclusive and, written with authentic voice, every teacher would be grateful to have that included in their library. Even if we already have it, more than one copy just means, more books to share. So that's a couple of my ideas.
We're really lucky in Rochester because our foundation supports so many different kinds of teacher grants that people have. So I know that's one thing that's available to our staff that is available. And also we have the Support a Project program too. The district really is committed to giving teachers and staff what they need for their kids to be successful and to be able to promote literacy. So those are two other ways to advocate for resources for your classroom. And I know a lot of times we have different funds based on funding. In like 31A, we had a grant this year that purchased books, and it was great because every elementary school in the district is going to get a variety of titles that can be used. So it's always, listen, I know teachers are busy. I know that, and you guys are magicians and you got a lot going on, and but keeping your eye opened or keeping attuned to those opportunities where, maybe you will get one of the books from Donald one day, Colleen. I hope you do. You'll have to let us all know if you do. But those are also some really unique and sometimes fun ways to opportunities to get it to. I know when I taught, I didn't live in Rochester. I lived in a different area in my local library. We work with them and they bought a lot of multiple copies. Like Jennifer's saying, it's nice to have the multiple copies because then you can share them to more. So I could check out multiple books and then kind of share them out that way too, is always a way.
Yeah, that's a great point, Katie, because even as a school librarian, I will check out, I live in West Bloomfield, so I will use the Rochester Library and I'll check out books in West Bloomfield and I'll get them through mail. So I'll be getting a book from Petoskey if it's not here yet. Use your resources because you can share a book. It doesn't mean you have to own it, right? And I think that sometimes we kind of get caught up in, oh, I need to buy all of these books, and that would be amazing and lovely. But the children's publishing industry is so fast and so many new books are coming out that it's near impossible to financially keep up with that. And I would second Katie's point about the foundation. At Brooklands, we wrote a huge literacy grant, and oh my goodness, we got and it was all inclusive texts, and books went directly to classroom libraries because, I wanted to support, it shouldn't be a school library or a classroom library, right? Like it can't be either or. We have to support both because kids need access in many different places. So use the foundation and write those grants. It's a lot of work, but not, it's not too bad. It's worth it.
And don't be afraid to reach out to your colleagues. My other role in my district in Warren Woods is as a coach. And so I've been curating lots my inclusive library, and I'm eager to share. As my books arrive, I send out a quick email to my teachers and I say, hey, I got another book. I can't wait to share it with you guys. And I'm eager to do read alouds into classrooms, and I'm happy to share my books with whatever teachers need them. So don't be afraid to reach out to your colleagues and say, hey, I'm wondering what you have. I'd like to take a look at some of your books, because again, just like Colleen said, you don't have to own these books in order to share them. It would be great if we could just pick books and put them in our cart and go. We know that education doesn't always work that way, but we can also just use our resources. We have, between us, we all have lots of great things. So don't be afraid to reach out to your peers, reach out to other parents to see what they have that you all can kind of swap and share.
I am housed in Rochester, and people that have been in my room, the kids said, is this a library in here? Because I told you my passion is collecting children's picture books. So I usually have them all displayed up. Right now they're down because we were being sanitized, but I like to share that with teachers that I work with, volunteer to go into rooms, share those books with teachers so they get in the hands of children. So I'm all about, hey, I'm part of this community. This is my passion. I love to share what I love and hope that you will like to share and join in the talk with me.
Well, and even in the remote world, we have to remember that so many authors and creators have been so generous sharing their work online. And if we can support them and buy a copy of their book, that's how they survive. But publishing companies have been so lenient and so understanding and accommodating with allowing us to read things online and getting permission to do that, and even authors recording their own books. And so really using that as well, that if you don't have a physical copy and you have the ability to share the author reading it themselves as well, is a huge, huge possibility, especially in this remote world. And there's nothing better than having the author themselves share the book.
With that list of books that I shared with that screen shot that you saw, also included in the resources, all of those titles are included with links to a read aloud of the actual book being read aloud. So if you want to preview that book or get a feel for it, that's a way to do it too. So right in the link, right in the title, there's a link to a YouTube read aloud of that book too.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, our next question for tonight is, how can I have engaging conversations with my children about inclusive text? And this one is for Lynn.
Hi, do you want to put that PowerPoint slide up?
Yes.
All right. Well, I just wanted to put these pictures up here because this was my childhood and they may seem like old photos from a history book, but I want to tell you that they started conversations with my family, which gave me my reading identity. None of this was censored from me. I was in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade when all these events, which we all consider part of history, now happen. And the fact that my father and mother encouraged conversations at our dining room table and used things like, well, what are you noticing? What do you think about that? Always. I didn't know those are the kinds of questions that later on research would say you need to say with children, but look at what my life was like and think about how our students now today are having very similar pictures and things happening behind the scenes for them. So starting those conversations early with students about what are you noticing? How does that make you feel? Do you see a bit of yourself here? How can we make our community better? What are things that we can do? Starts to make you feel empowered about your life and thinking more about having conversations all the time, even when it's hard, even when it's joyful, even when it's silly. Such as you don't want to ever date those guys, look at their hair. Can you hit the next slide, Tiffany? One of the things that was important for me is my dad and I bonded very closely with old movies. He likes sports. I don't like sports. So when he would sit down to watch Bill Kennedy at the movies or Dialing for Dollars with Rita Bell, and it would come to the commercial time, he would just start talking to me. He was a history teacher. And you can see one of my favorite movies clip is up there, Casablanca. And he would just kind of casually talk about, what are you thinking about that? And he'd explain the time period, the history of it. And we would just have these conversations. And he started noticing and telling me, are you thinking about, what are they doing with women in here? What are you thinking about how those people look in here? Talking about race, socioeconomic. He had me start to think about questions about whose story is being told and who is telling the story. And you really pointed out to me that movies are a magnifying glass of what was happening at the time. And our kids are influenced by movies in these same ways. So I want you to think at a very early age, starting at 8, we were sharing these movies, this critical lens of thinking about books and stuff was starting to be put in place in my head with our conversations they had. And I want you to also think about the emotional bonding that went on, because I love my father. And so we talk about nostalgia and good memories. This is the memory of my dad who's been gone many years. When these movies come up again, I think about my dad and these thoughts go through my mind. Hi, I just had to get the sound in the background to stop. Can you do the next slide, Tiffany? So what I want to share with you is look at all the wonderful books. Thank you, everyone. I can't wait to use these resources because once you have the book's going to do the work for you of introducing topics that are happy, sad, hard, diverse, all of that. So when you have a great book choice and meaningful conversations, look what it can do for our students. They can start to see themselves and their community in that, which is the relevance piece. When things are relevant to us, we care about them, and that's engaging. And when it's engaging, we pay attention for longer periods of time. The books, as everyone's mentioned, help develop empathy for characters and situations. It might be like ours. It might not be like ours. We might see a way someone else has possibilities for solving a problem. And I always like this last one the best, is it helps us to realize and notice new thoughts and ideas about yourself and your community. And they call that a lot of times in the research and the lessons from Teachers College, the heart work. When you can engage students' hearts and your children's hearts, they're going to care more about what you're reading with them. And lots of times, these are the books my grandkids and my own daughter like me to read again and again because they captured them. Tiffany, you want to do the next one? So along with the heart work, we want to do the head work. That means we're going to be teaching kids how to be better readers, right? That's what we're all here in school for. So when we do read aloud, or kids have independent reading, or we're sitting in strategy groups or guided reading groups, we want kids to have opportunities to learn and apply those reading strategies that help them to take these understandings and use them whenever they read. So for example, tonight we're going to be reading a little short narrative text. And we know that narrative text always has characters and settings and problems and troubles and resolutions in a lesson. But how boring is that just to talk about it that way? It's not very engaging, isn't it? It doesn't grab your heart. It doesn't stay with you. It's not memorable. But that is the head work. So if you combine the head work with the heart work, now we have students that are primed and ready, and your children are too, to have those conversations that are memorable. Tiffany, do you want to do the next one? So what I thought we would do tonight is this was one of the books that was on there. And I have to tell you, I get these new favorites, and this one is mine. So everyone right now that has a child that's a relative, guess what they're getting for presents? Isn't it awful? So I have like multiple copies that I'm ready for when those birthdays come up. So what I thought we would do is read a little bit of this and start talking about hearing some of the ways that my dad talked to me that stay with my head and my heart. Some of the ways that you could talk to your child at read aloud time, some of the ways that we can add to our repertoire as teachers. So the very first page of the story is this is The Day You Begin by Jacqueline Whitson. And it says, there will be times when you walk into a room and no one there is quite like you. Can you do the next slide? Maybe it will be your skin, your clothes, or the curl of your hair. Will you do the next slide, Tiffany? There will be times when no one understands the way words curl from your mouth, the beautiful language of the country you left behind. My name is Rigoberto. We just moved here from Venezuela. And because they don't understand, the classroom will fill with laughter until the teacher quiets everyone. Leave it right here on this slide, please. Rigoberto from Venezuela, your teacher says so soft and beautifully that your name and homeland sound like flowers blooming, the first bright notes of a song. Wow. We have seen some characters getting introduced, haven't we? We've seen two of them. Tiffany, can you go back to the very first slide of this book? Right there. Thank you. So let's think about what you might be noticing. I'm noticing that she looks a little worried. She looks apprehensive. I think she's in a new place for the first time. It might be school. It might be the first day of school. It might be a new school time for her. But she's not looking very happy. She's looking more worried. What are you noticing? Can you do the next slide, the next picture? I'm really spending time looking at this one. Take a minute to look at this one with me. Look at her face. Are you noticing that her eyes are very wide and she's holding on to her hair? I pull on my hair when I'm nervous. Do you see a bit of yourself in here? Do you do that too? maybe fidget with things and pull on things. I think she's looking at the other children that might be in her classroom. I'm wondering if she's thinking, no one looks like me. No one has hair like me. Are we going to have things that are going to be the same? Can we be friends? And you can see from the faces on the students, some of them are just looking like, hey, one girl doesn't look particularly very happy, does she? Another boy is just like, as bewildered as she is. So there's all those things that we're noticing about the characters and gaining information about from both the pictures and the words. And then when you turn to the next slide, Tiffany. Okay, in this one, I see two boys here, but I think it's the same boy. I was kind of surprised by this one. Did this confuse you at first too? That you're thinking to yourself, why is it? I think it's the same boy. And I'm thinking about what the author was saying about this boy as he was thinking about this. He was thinking in the first slide that that's his homeland. He's remembering. I think he might be remembering. And he's pretty picture, isn't it? Beautiful trees, birds singing. And then right next to it, we have what looks like a school clock. Did you notice that too? Did you notice those little details? And he's in school and his face looks so different. I'm really thinking and wondering, do you think he might look a little sad and maybe he's a little homesick? And he's thinking, are there some people here like me? One piece I wanted to add that isn't in the pictures, that's in the word. Did you listen to what happened when the children laughed? Did you hear? I'm going to read this part one more time. And because they don't understand, the classroom will fill with laughter until the teacher quiets everyone. Is this like your classroom and community? If someone did this to a student in your classroom, would your teacher do that too? Would they say, shh, let's be more welcoming? Is this making you think about how your classroom is? Do you see some of yourself in here? We're going to read just a couple more pages of this story. So go ahead, Tiffany. There will be times when the words don't come. Your own voice, once huge, now smaller. When the teacher asks, what did you do last summer? Tell the class your story. We went to France, Kayla says. These shells came from a beach in Maine, a boy named Jonathan holds out in a jar filled with tiny shells so fragile. They look like they'll turn to dust in your own untraveled hands. My whole family went to India, Spain, South Carolina. Each souvenir a small triumph of a journey. Their travels going on. And turn to the last slide that we're going to read today. And as you stand in front of that room, you can only remember how the heat waved as it lifted off the curb and your days spent at home caring for your little sister who made you laugh out loud and hugged your heart at nap time. You can only remember the books you kept on reading long after she had fallen to sleep. And in that room where no one else is quite like you, you look down at your own empty hands and wonder, what good is this when other students were flying and sailing and going somewhere? Wow. Now we're going to think about how we can invite our students in and our children in to have this conversation, because I did a little modeling before that and talking about things that I noticed. Maybe my friends here might help me out with some of these things. So we've learned some new things about the characters at this point, especially one character. We seem to be seeing the story through her eyes. What seems to be troubling her now? Are you noticing some things that are troubling her? Would any of my friends like to chime in and share what they think might be troubling her? What are you noticing and wondering about?
I think she feels bad because she doesn't have those things to share. She doesn't feel like her experiences were as great over the summer as what the other kids have.
So are you wondering that she's worried that they might be judging her?
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me.
Can you go back one picture, Tiffany? Is anybody noticing anything in here that might make you think and wonder if what Rochelle said is confirming your thinking or challenging it?
I noticed something. I noticed that she's on one side of the page and the other students are on the other side. And a lot of times I know that illustrators will separate between that fold in the middle to show some kind of separation. So that seems to be the case since the beginning of the text.
Go to the last page again, the last slide. So are you surprised? Is anyone surprised? Like, wait a minute, I thought she was in her classroom. Why is the author showing this picture? Is that surprising to you? What does this mean? Why did the author put this here? What are you thinking? And if friends don't jump in, you can always be the bottler. So I'm thinking the author put this in because this is what she's thinking in her head right now. This is how she might be remembering back. Because the story starts out on this page, as you stand in front of that room, you can only remember. So I think the author put this in here because she might be starting to get us to think about a lesson that we can learn about ourselves through her. So I'm surprised about this girl because I'm confused about things she said. And sometimes we can't all hear it at the same time. So could I repeat just one line, so maybe we can think more about this? So she said, you were thinking about your days spent at home caring for your little sister who made you laugh out loud and hugged you hard at nap time. And you can only remember the books you kept on reading long after she had fallen asleep. Is that making you think something about her? How do you think she felt about that time when it was summer and she was with her sister? Are you thinking that she kind of had fun? Yeah, I think that maybe she enjoyed it. But then look down at the bottom. What good is this when students were flying and sailing and going somewhere? She's thinking her story is what? Not good enough. I'm wondering if this is the beginning of the hint of the author leaving a trail to help us think about a lesson. Is this helping us think about what we could do in our own community to make other children feel comfortable in our classroom? What we could work on together? Okay, can you go to the next slide? What do you mean she's not going to read the rest of the book? No, I'm not going to read the rest of the book because you need to hear that book. Unfortunately, it's not online being read by someone that I particularly enjoyed their version of it because I think this person stopped when they were reading this book and put in comments that I didn't think were necessary to be in there and took away from the true meaning of what Jacqueline Woodson wanted us to understand, because Jacqueline Woodson is not just talking about African-American students. There are other children that are in this book of different backgrounds that are having trouble finding their own stories as well. And this person that's reading the story detracts from that. So I wouldn't suggest you use that YouTube version. Read it yourself. I often like to pair up books that have similar themes. So as we get kids starting to have conversations about one book and they're just starting to warm up to have that conversation, see how some of my friends here were not willing to take a risk and jump in because it is a little scary in front of a big crowd. And some were. By the time we do the next book, more are going to feel like they could talk about it, especially when I keep repeating the same kinds of questions and statements. I can't tell you how many times from third grade until when my father passed away when I was in my 50s, he would say the same thing. So what do you think about that? What are you wondering? What do you know? And he would never give me answers. It used to drive me crazy, but now I'm seeing how empowering that is. So when kids anticipate what surprised you, do you see some of yourself? And I'm repeating some of those questions. They start to think that way when you read them. This is one of my new favorite books that Colleen had shared with me that I needed to read right away. It's called I Am Enough. Bella's also getting this for a birthday present on Saturday because it's an empowering book by a first voice person who's multiracial and also the child of deaf parents who feels like she's an actress on TV, that she was bullied most of her life for being biracial and the daughter of deaf people. So she wrote this book to empower girls of all backgrounds that you are enough, you matter in this world. And it's a similar story and a similar theme to the other book we just read. Next slide, Tiffany, thank you. So if you noticed, here are some of the questions that encourage conversations. What did you notice? Why do you think that might be important? What surprised you and why? That's a good one. Did you see a bit of yourself in that story? Say some more. Remember, everything that everyone's talked about before me was about, are we pulling books in where children can mirror themselves or see something about it they can engage with? How is the community in the story like yours? A lot of kids will see classrooms like that, won't they? The first day of school, even virtually online. What was your summer like? Tell me what you did. What did you learn about yourself from this story? And how will this help me to be better? How can we take these lessons and be a better person? Like, wouldn't we want to all those children walk into a classroom and feel welcome? And that teacher was doing that, wasn't she? She negated that. Next slide. I love this quote from Cornelius Minor because I think he kind of pulls together what we all think about when we're teachers. We're just not teaching a curriculum, we're teaching students. When we read books to our children, we're educating our next generation coming up. He says this, I want to build a bridge for children, a bridge between what we are doing in class and the lives that they lead outside of class. I want to be able to show kids how each skill I teach in class makes life better outside of class. And the reason we include these all-inclusive books is everyone has that opportunity to be a part of that. Don't worry about those questions and where I got all that wonderful information. I shared with you and the resources, all of my resources that I used to come up with those questions, and it will be there for you, so you don't have to worry about writing things down or remembering them if you want to use those questions with your class, or if you want to use them with your own children at home or grandchildren.
I think it's important to add too that when you think about picture books, so often we think that those are geared just for our younger readers, but picture books can be, you know, K5, K12, I would argue. A lot of them in 32 pages can carry a pretty big message. So if you are a teacher who is upper L, I would encourage you to not steer away from them. If you're parents of older children, to not think that they're too old for those, to let them read them for enjoyment, to read them out loud. And this is an opportunity too, just to highlight the importance of actually reading aloud to children and how important and vital that is for their development. It's the single most beneficial thing you can do for their overall academic achievement. And there's study after study to prove that. If you're looking for more reason to read aloud, there's a really great book called The Enchanted Hour. If you're a teacher or a parent, it is probably one of the best professional books that I've read, and it's geared towards parents, but as a teacher, I've learned so much. So just to highlight that importance of just reading aloud. Of course, we want to read aloud those inclusive books, but don't be afraid of the picture books. I mean, I have great novels back here that are also super amazing and inclusive, and graphic novels, The New Kid, and all these great choices. But I tell you, 32 pages, you can get a lot of great stuff in.
And Colleen, I would also make a plug for reading picture books with students in middle school and high school too. You know, that's when I taught 8th grade, that was one of the tools I could use, because you said in 32 pages, you can make a point, and you know, the students really do still love to be read to.
And, you know, in the upper L grades and the middle school and high school, you know, we use novels as read alouds also. So you can do this with a novel in the classroom. You could do it as a parent reading a novel, you know, partner reading with your child. They're reading, you know, every night. I know as a teacher, we always recommend 30 minutes of independent reading a night. So, you know, if you're reading this book with your child, even a novel, a chapter length book, you can still have these, you know, ask these same questions that Lynn was sharing with us from the picture book. I mean, you know, anything by Jason Reynolds or Ghost Boys or Kwame Alexander or Rita Williams Garcia, all of these, again, are first person authors. And these books will still lend, you know, they're longer and they're obviously more appropriate for older kids, but you can read this book with your child, or your child can read this book and maybe you read a chapter, and you can still build these conversations, you know, with other longer text as well. The conversation is fluid, you know, not necessarily just with a picture book as well.
Well, and I think too, in the remote world, we have to also remember that audiobooks count. right? Listening to books, and there's been some recent research and studies done that the same parts of your brain light up, whether you're listening to a book or whether you're reading it independently yourself. And so when you think about access and you think about your child or your student and what they are able to read independently, if there's a book that you know might not be accessible to them yet, that an audiobook is a great way to listen as a family in the car, even just allowing your child or your student to follow along with the text. So it's just another way when we think about the three main things that I always come back to with Donald and Miller when you think about books are we giving kids time? Are we giving them choice? Choice. Like let them read whatever they want and encourage these inclusive books. And are we giving them access? And so there's a lot of ways to make sure that we can access books, even if we are in this remote world. There are options for us.
I wanted to add one more thing about reading aloud to students. If you noticed, I read several pages before I stopped. And when you're reading at home with your child or even in the classroom, you'll start to see where they are like this because they're so interested in something that's happening, they have to talk. I try not to stop too often because it's like a movie. You get into the flow of it and you're enjoying the story, and to have someone to keep interrupting you with asking you questions when you're just starting to get into it and understand it is really disruptive. So be very careful when you stop to ask those questions. The kids will start sending you very strong verbal signals in K1 and 2, those lower grades. They let you know they just got to talk. Same with the older kids that work with 3, 4, and 5. They really let you know.
And I think your examples, Lynn, were just great. I can tell that you hold those memories with your dad so near and dear to you. I have a 10-year-old son, and this summer he's been doing a lot of reading aloud to me. Usually when we're in the car for a long drive, I'll say, okay, read me a couple chapters of your book. And it's great because then he will stop and say, what did they mean by that? Like if there's a part where he's a little bit confused, and it's just been great. It's been a great way to bond, and it doesn't feel like schoolwork. It doesn't feel like work. It's just a way to have good conversations, and it goes so much further than just reading a book. You know, it lets your child know that we can have these conversations, and I can approach you and talk about things. And even if it's a difficult topic, because as we all know, the images that we're seeing now, just like when you were growing up, Lynn, the images that kids are seeing. I have a 10-year-old son growing up in Detroit, and he's seeing some hard images, and he's asking he's afraid. And as an adult, I'm afraid. So I can understand that and respect that, but I don't know what it's like to be a 10-year-old boy afraid of what I'm seeing on television right now. And I want him to be able to ask his dad and I these questions. What's going on? What does this mean? You know, what's going to happen when I go back to school? Will people, think different things about me? So those are ways that we can have those hard conversations where they just feel like a mom and a son just talking about the things that we always talk about. So I'm grateful for those experiences. And I hope that Lynn, when he gets older, he can look back on those conversations and those times and say, that was a great bonding time. That was great. A great way to get my questions answered. And I think when we talk about how to have these conversations, how to have what we might think is a hard conversation with a kid, we just think about, you can't just turn it on and turn it off, right? These things, this is how you build up to it. This is how you establish that trust. This is how you open those lines of communication. And when he comes to me with something that, even if I don't really have an answer, I can be honest with that and say, I really don't know, Caleb, but let's find out. Let's see what we can do to find out about that, so that he knows that I'm not always going to have all the answers, but he can still come to me with any question that he might have.
Well, and just sharing that sacred time of the read aloud with your children at home and with school, it shows that you value it. And kids pick up really quickly on what we value and what we place importance on. And so, in our home, when we have books different places and when we're showing inclusive text, we're showing that we value the experiences of people who are very different than us. And, I can have these conversations with my 4- and 6-year-olds, and it sounds very different than when I'm teaching, my 5th graders in the library. But they ask great questions. And like Lynn said, just to read it like a movie and then ask, well, what did you think? What did you notice? Things of that nature are so poignant. And then just a shout out for graphic novels. And I know that they're, gosh, if I could, if we had another 3 hours, we could do a whole workshop on those too. But the new kid I'm actually rereading right now, and my niece was over today and she's in middle school. She's like, oh, you're reading The New Kid. I love that book. And she holds graphic novels to her almost like, I mean, something that is like a comfort item. She will read and reread these novels that she connects with. But when we talk about images, Rochelle, and we talk about the images that students are seeing and that we're living in this very visual world right now, that visual literacy is a component of literacy as well. So when we talk about looking at the authenticity of illustrations and picture books, that's super important. But the power that images have in graphic novels are just amazing. There are things that the creator can draw that simply could not be put into words. So the conversations you can have among that, and I know as a teacher that's hard to share a graphic novel with your class, and that becomes tricky unless you have a dot cam, but in the remote setting, you might be very easily, able to get permission and share those images. But at home, being able to look at those together, and that's an access point as well. And they are real books. Graphic novels are real books. They are not easy to read. There's so much research. If you need it, I'll send it your way. To prove that, in fact, it's often harder to read graphic novels because you have to do so much interpretation of the images and so much visual literacy as well. So it's very challenging, and it's meaningful and it's important. So don't dismiss those if your kids are like, it's like, oh, comic book, that's junk. It's totally not. It is so good for your readers. And there are great inclusive graphic novels as well.
I think, just kind of piggybacking on what everybody was saying, I think the big idea is, regardless of the mode or method that you are reading these inclusive texts with your child or your student, the best place to start, I found as a mom and as a teacher, when you are engaging in a topic that might be difficult, is just to ask that, that child, your child, well, what does this make you think? What is this making you feel? Because oftentimes they just need that invitation, and hearing their interpretation of it is just the stepping stone to then you can see where their insight is, and you can bring your own, emotions and perspective and build that conversation. And like Rochelle was saying, you build that connection, you build that trust. You don't always have the answers, but you are communicating that, your perspective and your opinion on this is important. So, what does this make you think? If you're reading a book about a difficult topic or about a cultural, from a cultural lens that you're not familiar with, what does this make you think? Kids will build those connections kind of on their own. Like, oh, this person, in this book is just like me because of this situation. You don't have to be intimidated to have these conversations with your child, whether it's a graphic novel, an audiobook, a picture book, or a novel. Just asking them what they're thinking and what this makes them feel is that door that opens, and the rest of the conversation will flow.
Thank you so much. Wow, so much good knowledge there. And thank you, Lynn, for modeling for us how to have those discussions. I feel like I learned a lot from you just there. So thank you so much for that. It's so important for us to give our kids a little bit more credit too, right? I heard some of you say that they know how to have these conversations. We don't always have to have the answers. We can be facilitators of discussions, not necessarily the one giving all the answers. So thank you everyone for that. We have another question here. And this question is for Jennifer. It says, how can parents and teachers address the feeling of guilt students may feel after reading or listening to books that may center oppression? So some of our students might feel guilty after we read a book to them, or after they read a book about a cultural group that maybe is deemed having oppression in some way. How can we deal with that?
One of this question kind of made me think about a time in my class this past year, the world before coronavirus. When we were still in person in 5th grade, we read for one of our classroom novels at the beginning of the year, this book, Home of the Brave by Catherine Applegate, who's also an amazing author. And it's about a 12-year-old boy who is a refugee from Sudan coming to Minnesota to escape the Sudanese civil war. And there's a scene in it where he is in Minnesota in America, and he goes into a grocery store and he just breaks down in tears and he's crying, and the friend he's with, asks him why he's crying, and he says, he looks at all of this food just in one aisle of an American grocery store, and he thinks about how just one aisle of food would have fed the people in his refugee camp, where he witnessed, a baby who died from starvation. And we had a conversation in my class about, well, again, what does this make you think? What does this make you feel? And a student came up to me afterwards and said, I feel really guilty because we have all of this, because I don't have to worry about hunger or where I'm sleeping. And I said, the point of this story and the point of these novels and these inclusive texts is not to make you feel guilty because of a privilege that you were blessed to be born with. It's to make you feel grateful. I think guilt can be paralyzing, but gratitude is empowering. When you feel grateful and you realize that you, have experienced, some sort of privilege, whether it's because, you're heteronormative or you're, white or Caucasian or male or whatever your social identity happens to be. And if that affords you a sense of privilege, because there are other people that are marginalized that don't have that same privilege, don't feel guilty. You didn't ask for this, you were blessed, but that privilege means that now you need to look back and say, well, what can I do to make things better for people who don't have the same blessing? How can I look back and help other people? How do I pay it forward? And I think that that's an important point to have, whether it's in the classroom or at home, is, guilt is not a productive emotion. Let's channel it into gratitude. And then what can we do to make this world better?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Wow, what a very comprehensive answer. And I never thought of it that way. So I really appreciate that. And I bet a lot of people also appreciate that. So thank you. Okay, I have my jar here. We have another question. This question is, what is the best way to organize and store inclusive books either in my classroom or at home so that they are available and accessible all year long, not just during certain months, for example, Martin Luther King?
You put them everywhere. You include them everywhere, right? Like there is not an inclusive bin or a diverse bin, and that just perpetuates this idea that it only matters during a certain time of year, right? Regardless of what that is. Now, if there's a holiday that is coming up and, Ramadan's coming up and you want to pull out a book that's highlighting that, of course, that would be effective. But books that highlight that culture should be in your library all the time. And so I just think that we have to truly value the work, and that it should be just normal and integrated into our everyday read aloud, into our every lesson. We really have to think as teachers, okay, well, here's the suggested read aloud. Could I alternate this with a more inclusive text that would be representative of my class, or maybe not my class? How can I ensure that this is taking place all the time? So yeah, don't isolate it into one area of your classroom or your home. And the more in your home, especially, that you can put books everywhere, it shows that you value reading. So, get a book bin, a little stack here and a little stack here, and some in the kitchen table and some over here. And I swear, especially if you have little kids and they're floating around your house, as they will be for quite some time, they will pick up a book, right? They will just gravitate to, oh, it's here, oh, it's over here. And you're showing that you value that. So yeah, just make it part of your library. There is no inclusive section.
Absolutely. Even if you have a fantasy genre bin, like there are authors that are, first person authentic voices who, write fantasy novels. I mean, there's a book right now that I'm in the process of reading, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. Like that's a fantasy, it is, that can go right in there with your Harry Potters and your Percy Jacksons. And, you don't need to have a separate bin. As a fifth grade teacher, we teach US history. And one of the things that I say to my class all the time is, Black history is American history. Chinese history is American history. Hispanic history is American history. We're woven into the fabric of our society. And so when you just put the books out there, then you're raising a generation of children who don't think of them as barriers. They don't think of these differences as something that separates us. They think of it as something that is inviting and appreciative. Because you know what, I'm reading a book about, a science fiction book about going to another planet or something. And, these characters in the book, they happen to be Asian American, or they happen to be, this person happens to be in a wheelchair getting on a rocket ship, whatever it could be. When you disperse them, then it just becomes part of their society, part of their reality. And that is the goal, moving forward for everybody.
I think too, that ties us back to the reason why it's so important to use inclusive, because we think about when Colleen mentioned how diverse can mean, this is the dominant group and this is everybody else. So if you organize your library that way, then that further perpetuates that, right? But if you are inclusive and if you have books about everyone, everywhere, then that is truly an inclusive library. So. All right. Our next question is, will teachers share the books that they're reading so that parents can have conversations at home with their children, either before or after the books are read? And this is for anyone.
I think it's important to remember that books can be culturally specific or specific to a group of people and also have universal themes. And so I think it's really, really important that, the specifics allow us to enter that world. And that is so, so, so important for the work that we do. But once we're in that world, it really is about the human experience, right? And so we're valuing and we're honoring that in our complex world that we live in. And so I think that it's really, really important that we continue to expose children to the world that we're living in. And that, and all means all. It doesn't mean some, or some that I'm necessarily comfortable with. All means all. And it's our job to advocate for all students. And, as a Rochester employee, I know that that is super important to our district as well.
And I will add on that that's why I happen to like this book that I share with you tonight, because there isn't a child that hasn't come to a first day of school feeling the way that girl felt, feeling the way that boy felt, even if you weren't from a foreign country. You're nervous. Last year or 2 years ago, I joined RCS. I was a little nervous. That's the human experience. And so the fact that despite where we come from and our backgrounds and our culture, there are things that are the same about us as human beings. And I tend to like to look for a lot of universal theme books that are inclusive books to share with my grandchildren and children, and also with my students at school. I look for those books because that just joins us together instead of dividing us apart.
Well, and I also think that everybody really talked a lot about how, especially Rochelle talking about your son, how these books open up having these conversations. And it's very, very safe to have conversations about a book that might make you feel uncomfortable or that you might not have a life experience with. So I think that that's an opportunity. And I think that we're trusting our teachers and our professionals to choose these texts that are going to be representative of students and their families in their classrooms. And parents always reserve the right to know, what their child is reading. And as a librarian, it's my job to protect the intellectual freedom of the library and ensure that all of these books are there. But of course, if a parent wasn't comfortable with the book, that is that parent's right. So I think it's clear, and Katie, I know, has spoken to this too, and maybe can make that distinction clearer than I am at the moment. I don't know.
It's so funny. I was like, yes, this is, you're setting me up for my, my soapbox moment. Yes, a lot of times, there may be books that are read in the class where parents have a problem, or a student may come home with a library book that the parent is like, you know what, I was not prepared to talk about this with my child. And my basic response to people who call and talk about that is, here's the nice thing about books, is that you can close them and you can send them back. And like everyone's saying, it's an opportunity to have some good conversations. And you can shut the book and have a conversation with your family about, and just keeping things simple. You know what, this doesn't align with our family values, or I believe this book was written for maybe a little bit older child. Well, let's check it out later on when you're a little older. Or you know what, this book seems really scary. You don't like scary stories. You're going to be in my bed all night. I think we'll close the book and we'll send it back to the library, and that's okay. In listening to a lot of the conversations too, I would just add, when you're having these conversations with your children, that to remember also to you also want to make sure you're answering the question that's asked. I kind of learned that the hard way as a parent. Sometimes, my girls would ask me a question. I go on this long involved, thinking I was, enlightening them to something. And they're like, that wasn't even what my question was, but thanks, Mom, for that. So, and that's just part of being in a family too. And you can acknowledge, sometimes a good book for one family isn't a good book for ours. And you can send it back. You can send a note explaining why you don't like it. And that provides perspective as well. But like Colleen said, intellectual freedom and making sure that we have books that speak to lots of different people and lots of different situations. That's part of the community that we're trying to build, because we do believe that all means all, and we want to make sure that everyone feels like they are a part of it. I was listening to a podcast, and I'm just going to impart this information with you, because I listened to Alan Alda was interviewing Brene Brown, and she was talking about her work with empathy. And when we first started, that was one of the things too, that so much that I believe good conversation is that empathy piece, where you get to see something from somebody else's perspective, or you can start showing compassion for something that maybe you didn't understand or realize before. It also goes what Jennifer was talking about, not necessarily, you don't have to feel guilty. You could feel blessed, and what are you going to do about it? But Brene made this great analogy. I wrote it down, and I'm going to steal it, and I'm going to share it with you, because it was one of those aha moments for me. But she was talking about, when you are part of a group that is the majority culture, and you have the dominant perspective, it's what you've grown up learning. It's your standard norm. So the lens that you see through things just reflects that dominant experience. So when people from a marginalized group tell their story, the lens that they have is a bifocal, because they exist in the same lens as the dominant culture, but then their perspective is that little lens that they have that makes their story so true and real and experience for them. And for me, I just thought that was a really great way to kind of to look at it and frame it in a different way. And really that, our job is, when we hear these stories, we understand what those experiences mean to those people. It isn't our job to say, well, that wasn't that terrible. I don't know what they're so upset about. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. It's really, validating that, yeah, that is your story, and I hear you and I see you.
And I think Rochester has done such an amazing job with our staff talking about you matter, right? And that has just been a wonderful theme that we had last year. And I think that carries through, not only to each other and to our colleagues and our team, but to families and to students. And so when we have these books available to kids, it's showing that you matter, and your voice is heard, and we're going to include that.
And I just also wanted to add too, that feeling validated is a basic, healthy psychological need, right? And school is the place where these kinds of feelings and people to feel included need to happen. So we have to make all students feel welcome. It really is our moral imperative to do that.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you. And here's our final question for the evening. So the question is, and we've kind of hit on this a little bit, but we should probably talk about it a little bit in more detail. With the new RCS virtual campus, and with the possibility of remote learning, what recommendations does the panel have for online inclusive books? And will the books be available for checkout or borrowing them like the physical books? I think that's what the question meant. So if we'd like to speak to the virtual campus, maybe remote learning, how books can be online, and then maybe then bridge into some hard copies that maybe we can give to parents.
Well, I know from a library standpoint, the district has really been extremely supportive and financially supporting our RCS digital library, which is growing. And I know that as we continue to kind of navigate this remote world, I know that that's a priority, which is fabulous. And I know that there is a difference between holding a real book and reading a book, you know, on a device. And I totally understand that. But it's another access point, and it's something that the district, you know, that we can offer. So the ILSs, the media specialist, school librarians, all of those terms interchangeable, we're working really hard to make those inclusive recommendations. And so there are experts working behind the scenes very carefully to make sure that the collection is representative of all voices and to make sure that it's current and it's high interest, so that you can anticipate seeing to continue to grow. And that will be something that will be amazing to have even, you know, post-COVID, that we'll just have access to those things online as well. As far as when it comes to actual checkout of books, considering that we just now know that we're going remote, I think that's not a question that we can answer just yet. There's a lot of logistics that go behind that, safety logistics and navigating that. So to be safe, I would say that your public library, as long as it's open, I know are following the safety protocols. And so that's a great way to get actual books in your hands. I know the Bookmobile probably is still, I don't know, because I don't live in Rochester, if it's still going around, but it's so easy to place holds in the library and you just pull up and pick them up. So, you know, sit with your children, and as a teacher, use, you know, if you're living in a different district than you're teaching, and you can use both libraries, and you can easily pull up to the curb and get those books that have been already quarantined and safe to read. So those are 2 answers. I hope that's helpful.
I would just add too that, you know, staff would have an opportunity to, you know, get the materials that they typically use. I would assume that a lot of people have their materials at home because they had been remote. That's how we ended the year. And, you know, certainly the logistics of, like Colleen said, you know, we want to work through the process of how do we make sure that we have books in kids' hands, but we do need to make sure that we can do it in a safe way. And, you know, all those kinds of determinations will be, you know, flushed out over time here.
And as far as, you know, the classroom teachers, one of the, there's a website, a program online called Epic that, you know, has hundreds, if not thousands of titles. And I know that some of them have already been curated into collections. And I believe that there, you know, there are several people who have kind of come up with diverse or inclusive text that range a variety of levels too. So, and that is also, you know, free as a teacher that you can use with your students. And there are books that are online, there are audiobooks, and there are just the e-reader books. So, you know, that's another way to get books into the hands of students as a teacher, even when we're in this virtual setting.
But rest assured, we care very deeply about getting books in kids' hands. So if there is a safe way that we can do this, trust me, you know, the ILSs, that is something that has come up in all of our discussions, and classroom teachers as well, how we know how important it is. So if there is a way, we promise that we will make that happen. But, you know, parents and families, just be patient, because, you know, we're navigating this all together, and we have to put safety first.
Thank you so much. My jar is empty. That's all the questions that we have. But real quick, I'd like us to just kind of go around. We can whip around, and everybody maybe can say one small sentence, a piece of advice that you have when it comes to inclusive books, and anything that we've talked about tonight that maybe you want to leave our viewers with, something that you want to, boom, drop the mic on our viewers. Anything you can think of.
I do not have I wish I had a drop the mic moment. My nerdy brain, the first thing I was going to suggest was, do your research, but that doesn't seem very exciting, but there are so many resources, right? Like there are people here, like this group is ready to help you. The ILS team is ready to help you. Your child's teacher wants to help you. So that would be my best advice is if you really are looking for something, those are the things that teachers love to talk about. We talk for like 2 hours about books. I could keep going. So always reach out to your teachers. How about that?
My suggestion would be to find something that you don't know that much about, like maybe a culture or a tradition that you don't know that much about. Find a kid's book that has a first voice or an own voice that addresses it, and then have that shared experience with your child. And then you really can have that genuine conversation. Wow, I didn't know that was a typical traditional food that was eaten at this time, or something like that. And that gives you really a common learning experience, which is always great when that happens, no matter how old you are, no matter how young your child is or your students are.
I was going to say, stretch yourself, find some of these books, but also find ones that you love. I know we were talking about our old favorite nostalgia books. Those are great, but stretch yourself to find new books. And then when you delight in them, share them with your students and your children, because when you truly love that book, like I told you right now, this is my new favorite before everyone was getting the Undefeated. So it's like, as I go through and find these new books from Rochelle's wonderful selection that she's put together and everybody else's, I can't wait to share them with everybody. So share what you have reached out and learned that's different, and share widely.
And I'll add on to that, just be open-minded as a parent and as an educator. Just really, really, really put your biases aside and be open-minded to, like Rochelle said, learning about other groups of people that are different than you. Educators and parents, read. If you are a teacher of reading and you value reading in your family and you want your child to value that, you need to be a reader as well. So challenge yourself, and reading picture books as an adult is actually great. It's kind of, if you love quotes and you love little snippets of things, I promise you within that picture book, it's like the best quote ever, right? So I mean, again, you're never, in my library, we always say picture books are rated E for everyone. You're never too old for a picture book. So be aware of that. And then as educators and teachers, like Lynn said, the power of a book talk, I cannot stress enough. A 2-minute little snippet, and you can do this in the remote world so easily, because a lot of times recording it and posting it would be amazing. If you could just commit yourself to doing a little book talk once a day and, throwing it up on your platform or doing a live book talk. I mean, I could literally, if we had more time, I would book talk all of these back here because I'm just like, I'm staring at them and they're screaming at me like, talk about me, they're so great. I'm telling you, you will have kids and students in the palm of your hand. I would book talk a book in the library and raffle it off. And I mean, kids that I never thought in a million years would be interested in a book, if I talk it up, and I'm only going to talk about books I love, right? So I'm not making this up. Kids are going to be so excited about it. So just read, talk about books, and get them in kids' hands.
I wanted to go along with what Rochelle, you said about just start with one. And at school and at home with my kids, I like to give them a choice, a couple of books to choose from. But when we do a read aloud, I'll ask my class at the end, who would like to take this home and read it to mom and dad? And with my boys, would you like to keep this book in your room? And then I find it, in their bed or tucked under their pillow, because they sleep with all their books there because they love them so much. But I think just start with one and see where that takes you.
I think for me, I don't know, I've been on this Hamilton kick lately. So it keeps running through my mind, the line, who tells your story? Because I think when you are, whether you're a teacher or you're a parent, whatever hat you happen to be wearing, when you are looking for inclusive text, one of the things just to ask yourself is, who tells your story? Who's telling this story? Who is the voice behind this? And that right there, if you can look and say, oh, the person who's telling the story is an authentic voice, that will give you peace of mind that this is an appropriate text. And the second thing I would say would, again, even when you're having this conversation with your student or with your child, again, going back to who tells the story, whose lens are we looking at this through, whose experience are we living this through, builds, just that question alone will open up people's minds and perspective to have to consider, what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes and whether this is an authentic representation of what this person, or this cultural group is living through.
Thank you so much, everyone. I guess I'd like to leave everybody with, so what now, right? So you've heard all of this. My friends have shared their knowledge and expertise about inclusive books. So what now? And this is such a great opportunity to not just look at a list of books and go out and buy them, but it's also a great opportunity to think about how you can now use what we've taught to then go out and see if you can find books that are inclusive yourself. So not always relying on a list that someone can just give you, but also thinking about how you can detect whether or not a book is culturally appropriate and representative of many different ideas, values, and cultural identities. So that's what I'd like to leave you with. And I just want to thank my friends here, the panel. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part in this discussion. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you to Rochester Community Schools. And we are so happy that you participated. You'll see down below, there's a little link. I've always wanted to say that, but you'll see there's a little link that you can click on. There's tons of resources, a lot of things that we talked about today. Some of the infographics, the wonderful book introduction and conversation piece that Lynn did. There's so much that we have. We put together so many resources for you. So make sure you click on that link. Also, when you click on the link, there's a reflection and like an exit ticket. So feel free to take a reflection survey. Tell us what your needs still are even after this point. We're going to be checking those surveys and putting a Q&A up on that same website. So we appreciate you, and we hope that you go out and check out some inclusive books for either your classroom or for your home. And we thank you so much, and I hope you have a great night.
Nice.